Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes and welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. And today, you may notice that the cover that I am showing you actually has three titles on it: The Secret Garden, The Little Princess, and Little Lord Fauntleroy. I do intend at some point to get around to the other two, but what I'm going to be talking about today is Little Lord Fauntleroy. Now, at one point, this was the most popular and well-known of Burnett's three books that we have in this collection here. But over time, I suspect that things have turned around, and now a great many more people know about The Secret Garden and A Little Princess than have heard of Little Lord Fauntleroy. So this is a book that, since it is the book that I'm talking about, let's move away from the cover, which has all three pictured on it, and move on to just the first one, because on the back of the edition that I have is this particular illustration, which is of a scene from Little Lord Fauntleroy. This is a book that was published initially in 1886. My edition came out in 1978, and this is an interesting little story about the most despicably perfect little boy you'll have ever heard of. Cedric Errol, who becomes Little Lord Fauntleroy, is the most perfect child that has ever existed. He is smart and clever and good, and with just the right amount of naivete to make him even more good. No, what makes this book so marvelous is not Cedric Errol, it's his grandfather, who is an earl, uh, and this earl has, he is the worst. He doesn't like people. He spent his entire youth avoiding his family and driving them off as best he might. He didn't like his elder two sons, who were set to inherit because, you know, the laws of primogeniture. And he drove off his youngest son when his youngest son ran off and married a young American woman. Because, you know, Americans, they are the worst. Um, Actually, if you've read a fair amount of English literature, you will probably discover that, yes, there is a great stretch of swathe of English literature, as in from England English, that thinks Americans are the worst. In any event, at the start of this book, our protagonist, one of our two protagonists, because of course there is Cedric and his grandfather, um, the young Cedric is being raised in America, and his mother is not particularly well off, as in the grand scheme of things. And he spends a lot of his time hanging around at the greengrocer's around the corner. He spends a fair amount of time hanging out with a bootblack who is his friend. Uh, and he's a lovely, amiable, handsome little chap who is kind to all and sundry and thinks the best of everyone. But, and so we see in this earliest illustration that is Cedric with his bestest best friend, Mr. Hobbs, who is a not particularly bright greengrocer around the corner. That is, he runs the corner store, and he's a good man and a nice guy and a true blue Republican sort of guy, but he's a little slow. But that doesn't matter because Cedric loves hanging around with him, and he reads to Cedric from the newspaper and talks to him about politics. And Cedric displays exactly the kind of grasp of politics that you would expect a child of younger than 10 to have. That is, I kind of believe whatever the people that I like best tell me, and I don't really question it. But that's sort of how kids are with politics a lot early on. But then one day, Cedric and his mother are approached by Mr. Havisham, and Mr. Havisham is the lawyer, the the solicitor rather for the Earl, and he arrives to explain to Cedric and his mother that since Cedric's father had died, and since the elder two brothers had died, Cedric is all that is left to inherit from the Earl. And upon receiving this information, Cedric goes on a stint of giving everybody money because he's generous and he wants to make sure that his friend the bootblack Dick can buy out his partner and run his own business, and he wants to make sure that the apple woman who is suffering from some sort of illness related to being elderly and having joint pains and things, that he wants to give her a new shawl and a new cart and a tent and a heater and things so that she can not suffer for it, and to pay Bridget, who is who is a close family friend, an amount of money to help her and her husband, because her husband has been ill, to tide them over until the husband can get better. She is given the sum of $25, which, based on what little research I've done, is the equivalent of giving a friend somewhere between $630 and $3,500. It is a hefty sum of money, especially if you're not particularly well off. Eventually, they go to England, and he meets his grandfather, and his grandfather doesn't want to see Cedric's mother, ever, because he expects that she's going to be the worst. You know all of those terrible stereotypes about Americans being boorish and ignorant and awful? That is what the grandfather expects the mother is going to be. And much to everybody's shock, Cedric isn't intimidated by his grandfather, and they get along like great gangbusters, and Cedric attributes everything his grandfather does to kindness and good-heartedness, mainly because his mother lied to him and told him that his grandfather was fantastic. Most of his attributions to his grandfather are uh, are due to the fact that he believes his grandfather is fantastic. So, over time, his lordship comes to have great affection. Over time, his lordship comes to an extent, tolerate the fact that the affections of Cedric are split between the Earl and Cedric's mother. We have here an illustration of Cedric's mother on her way to church, which is the first time that she comes face to face with the fact that she is, after all, the mother of little Lord Fauntleroy, which makes her the Lady Fauntleroy. And it's something of a moment in the village. There's a lot of talk about gossip in this book. I think Burnett realized exactly how much gossip gets around and how much people talk about things, because she really, really goes over a lot what's going on below stairs, a lot of what's going on with the friends and family of the butlers and the maids, and all of these people talking about how horrible the Earl is and how awful it is that he's got this wonderful grandson who's probably going to be terrified out of his wits, and wondering how amazing the grandson is not to be terrified. And you see the lad and his grandfather riding over Earl's Court together to look at the cottages being built. So, in the meantime, in America, Mr. Hobbs and Dick Tipton, they become friends, mostly because they were both friends with Cedric, and so Mr. Hobbs looks up Dick because he'd heard about Dick, and he wants to have somebody that he can talk to about the letters that he gets from Cedric and what's going on over there in England, and they become very, very good friends. And it's because of that friendship, um, because of Dick and Dick's know-how, because of a whole variety of things, that they are the key that resolves the one major conflict in this novel. Because the conflict that comes up is that a woman comes out of nowhere claiming that her son is the son of the Earl's eldest son. Now, both of the Earl's older boys were ne'er-do-wells, and when a horrible, horrible woman with a snotty, annoying child comes out of the woodwork, the Earl sighs and admits that it would be just like his son to have gotten a woman pregnant and then paid her to go away. But if her son is indeed the legitimate issue of the elder brother, then that makes him the next in line for the title of Earl. And it's Dick who winds up telling everybody and explaining that the woman in the picture, who is the mother of this supposed little Lord Fauntleroy, that woman is in fact his older brother's wife, and that her son is not the son of any child of an earl, but is in fact his older brother's son. And you have a marvelous denouement where he and his older brother and Mr. Havisham all show up in England and startle Minna, this woman, out of her gourd by producing the child's real father, who just waltzes off with him and basically says, if you need me, I'll be around, but I'm off. And she vanishes never to be seen again. And the Earl, after having talked to Cedric's mother finally, had come to realize that everything that he had believed of her was wrong, and that he had so disliked her and was getting his due punishment by having this other woman who was everything he had feared come up out of the woodwork. He finally gets along with Cedric's mother, and they all live very, very happily after, including the unfortunate Mr. Hobbs, who somehow becomes a great proponent of the English aristocracy, which is fascinating and hilarious. What makes this book great is listening to the grandfather be angry. It's listening to the Earl be furious at everything. It's listening to the Earl be perplexed by everything that Cedric says. It's being amazed that everything that Cedric tells him is indicating that he thinks that this Earl, who knows he is a terrible person, who knows that he's awful to everybody, and quite frankly is amused at the process of terrifying the people around him and being horrible to them. The entire experience of having everything he did be attributed to excellent, wonderful, kindly motivations is baffling to the Earl, and that bafflement forms so much of this book and is so very, very entertaining. And that's really what makes this book. It's not Cedric, it's not his mother, it's the Earl. It's the Earl being angry and being distraught and being irrational. And reading this book, that's what you read it for, is you read it for that Earl. And thus, I have very little more to say because I'm out of time. So, thank you for listening, and I hope to see you next time.